Right. Well, it was great to see everyone here this morning. I need to tell you one thing before we get started. We're going to be in a number of different places in all four Gospels. It kind of puts the story together for us. And the second thing is this, is that we're going to start at the end, and then we're going to finish it, and then we're going to go back to the beginning and start it. So just hold that in your mind. If I didn't tell you that, you're liable to be confused when I get started. So here's the end. We are at a point in Jesus' life, in this passage right now, that Jesus is one of the most popular people ever to hit the face of the earth. It has hit fever pitch, his popularity. The bandwagon effect is in full swing. I mean, everybody is in. They're all excited about Jesus. He has done some incredible things. He did this in front of 5,000 men, and you have to understand the way they used to count back in the first century. They counted the guys. They didn't count the women or the children. So you're looking at about 15,000 people. Jesus, in front of them, took 5 loaves, and when I say a loaf of bread, it's a barley loaf of bread about that big around, and 2 fish. There was the lunch of a young boy who was there, and he fed 15,000 people with this, and they knew it. It wasn't one of those miracles that Jesus did that everybody was like, did he do it? Did he not do it? I'm not really sure if it happened or not. Maybe we should go back and look at the replay of it to see really what happened here. They knew exactly what had happened. They had watched him multiply the bread and multiply the fish. He had fed these 15,000 people. And so they are about to rush him to make him king. Now, let me tell you why that's true. What they knew all growing up was this prophecy that Moses, way back in the book of Deuteronomy, way back when Moses lived, they had been taught this prophecy ever since they were a little kid. They went to church, they went to Sunday school, they heard everybody talk about it, that there was going to be this prophet that was going to come later on, and when he came, he was going to do even greater things than Moses had, and he was going to be a prophet like Moses. And so when he came, all the people were supposed to listen to him, so they were looking for this guy. So when he multiplies the bread and the fish, they connect the dots. They look at what Jesus did. They think back to Moses. They're like, okay, Jesus, bread, 2 fish, 15,000 people. Moses, manna, which we call it bread from heaven. And he feeds all of the Israelites for 40 years in the desert. And God gives them that miracle. They put these 2 things together, and they're like, this is the guy. This is the guy that is supposed to come. So here's the prophecy back in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verse 15. Moses is talking to the people, and they did a good job of remembering this, okay? The Lord your God, he says, will raise up for you a prophet that is like me from among your fellow Israelites, and you must listen to him. Moses did all these miracles. He provided them manna, bread from heaven. Jesus has been doing all these miracles. He's been healing people. He's been teaching. He's been preaching. And now these 5 loaves and 2 fish, they put those 2 things together, and they decide, we're going to make him king today. Here's what John chapter 6 tells us. When the people saw the sign that Jesus had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. It's him. He's here. And so perceiving, Jesus, understanding what these people were thinking about him, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So you have to understand what's going on with the Israelites to get what it is that they're doing right here. You go way back. You've got Hebrews, they're in Egypt, Pharaoh's over them, he's a taskmaster, they're slaves. Enter, okay, stage right, Moses, he shows up. You've got 10 plagues, the staff of God, gnats and flies and hail and the livestock and the Nile River turned to blood. Moses does all these signs. He delivers the people out of Egypt. They're in the desert. There's this manna from heaven. They're being fed. I mean, Moses is the guy in Judaism at that point. Enter Jesus, you've got people getting healed left and right. Your baby, your mama, your dad, doesn't matter what's wrong with them. He's touching them. Their ailments are they're instantly cured. Any disease, any paralytic. I mean, everybody's walking, they're talking, they're seeing, they're hearing for the first time in their life. All these things are going on in Jesus' life. Then he pulls out the 2 fish and the 5 loaves, and he feeds 15,000 people. And the Israelites are thinking, man, we're under the oppression of the Roman army. We've got this occupying force in our land, and our Savior is here. How can it not be the prophet that was to come? And so they're going to make him king. And Jesus understood, listen, not now and not here. Satan had already tried that with him one time. Remember, he told Jesus, he says, if you'll bow down and worship me, I will make you king. I'll make you the ruler over all of the kingdoms of the earth. And Jesus, he saw that temptation. He recognized it for what it was, and he backed away from it. It's just another temptation just dressed up differently for Jesus. Here, we want to make you king, and Jesus understood that that's not the way it's going to happen. Because the cross still had to come. Calvary still had to be there. The Romans still had to flog him. There still had to be these trumped up charges in a mock trial. Jesus still had to go to the cross. He still had to shed his blood there. All those things still had to happen. So he could not allow it. So what he did is he dispersed the crowd. He told the disciples, get in a boat and go. Okay? And then he went up on a mountainside to pray. Okay? So that's the end of the story. So let's back up a few steps, and we're going to start from where it began. Now, where it began was, again, what Jesus has been doing. He's teaching, he's preaching, he's healing, he's doing all of these miraculous things, and people are flocking to him. He is the guy of the hour. He is the most popular man around, and folks are excited about what Jesus is doing. And while Jesus is teaching, while he's preaching, while he's doing all this healing, he gets news. Now, it's not good news, it's bad news. And it's of the news of the sort that Jesus thinks to himself and tells the disciples, I've had enough for today. We're just going to get away for a little while. And here's what the news was. He's doing all these things. Some disciples, followers of John the Baptist, come to him and said, Jesus, we got to tell you something. Bad's been happening. John, you know, had been in prison. John the Baptist had been in prison because he'd been telling Herod Antipas, who was the ruler over Galilee at that time, it's not right for you to be married to your brother's wife. His brother's name was Philip. They got divorced. Herodias and him split up. So Herod decided he liked Herodias. I don't know, anyway, names, you know, they're funny in the first century. So he marries Herodias, and John the Baptist had been telling him, this is not right. It's not lawful for you to have her, to be married to her. And so Herod had put John in prison. Well, what happened is Herod's having a banquet. He and all of his buddies, they're drinking. They've been drinking too much. And they ask Herodias' daughter, Salome, to come dance for them. Now, I want you to get it. This is not a tap routine. This is not ballet. This is not a jazz type of ensemble. This is not what's going on there, okay? It is a young girl who is dancing provocatively in front of a bunch of old men who have been drinking. And I want to let me just throw this out there. Nothing good ever happens when men drink and young women dance. Bad, okay? So just strike that off of whatever list you might have. So Herod gets a little bit worked up over the whole event and makes some foolish promises. And he tells Salome, he says, that was good. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you up to half my kingdom. Now, he didn't mean literally half the kingdom. He's just saying, you name it, I'll give it to you. So she runs away. She gets with Herodias, her mom. She's like, go back to Herod and tell him I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. No, that's just gross. It's vile, it's evil, it's just the way things were, and sometimes they are even today. And so Herod, because he was a coward and he was a pervert and he was a fool, just said to the bodyguard, go ahead and do what she said, and he beheads John. They bring his head into a platter into Herod, where he's been drinking with all of his buddies, and there John is beheaded. That's the news that Jesus gets. And so you understand why he's like, let's get away. They hadn't had time to eat. All these crowds are pressing on them. We've done enough for the day. I'm done. Let's get away to a far away place. And so they head off to this remote location. So one of the things about momentum, that this just will stop there just for a minute, that momentum sometimes comes out of some of the most difficult circumstances in our lives. That it comes out of the most difficult times that we live through. We've been talking about momentum, and what that is really when God moves, when the Holy Spirit is at work in a church or in your life or in a family's life. And we think that when we are faced with dire circumstances, that there's nothing good coming out of this. I mean, we think all is lost. I can't do it. I'm not going to make it. I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to turn the lights on. I just don't even want to try anymore. Matter of fact, I just want to quit. Quitting's not a good option. We quit for moments and sometimes even seasons for our lives. But we get to this point where we just think all is lost. But what's going to happen that out of this incredibly difficult circumstance that happens with John the Baptist and Jesus and the disciples and the news they'd heard about Siloam's dance, God is going to do some incredible things. Jesus wasn't looking for this. He wasn't anticipating this. It's one of those things that happens at the moment. He feels and understands the movement of God. But when we go through times in your life, I just want you to understand and have hope that even when all seems lost, when you're just wore out and you just don't think I can do another day of this world, that God is still God. And God is still working. He's still bringing about hope for us in our lives. And so Jesus decides after hearing the news that he needs to get away. Just as an aside, and I want you to see this just because of the effects of sin and what happens when people reject God, Herod ends up absolutely paranoid over Jesus because he thinks, he's convinced himself in his mind that Jesus really isn't Jesus, but Jesus is John the Baptist, who's been reincarnated or raised to life. And that's why Jesus can do what he's doing, because it's really not Jesus, it's John the Baptist come back from the grave to haunt Herod. And it's scaring him to death. Listen to what it says in Matthew chapter 14. It says, when Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, heard about Jesus, he said to his advisors, this has got to be John the Baptist raised from the dead. That's why he can do the miracles that he's doing. For Herod had arrested and imprisoned John as a favor to his wife Herodias, the former wife of Herod's brother Philip, because John had been telling Herod, it's against God's law for you to marry her. And so Jesus, hearing the news about John, gets the disciples in the boat like, okay, we're going to go away. I've had enough for the day. I can't do anymore. Let's go. So they get in a boat and go. Now, here's the thing about the Sea of Galilee. It's not like the Gulf of Mexico. You're 400 miles offshore and nobody sees you. They're in a boat. They're not that far offshore. So the people, they're watching Jesus and the disciples and they're seeing, they're like, hey, I bet I know where he's going. Yeah, that is exactly where he's going. And so all these guys and women and children, they start running along the seashore, okay, following Jesus in his boat. They're getting more people from other towns. And so when Jesus finally gets ashore and lands the boat and comes off, he finds 15,000 people waiting on him. He's like, I was trying to get away from y'all, And I get off the boat and all of you guys are here. And Jesus, being Jesus, is just, he's better than we are. And listen to what it says in Mark 6. So he tells the disciples, he says, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So they hadn't even eaten. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. And now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd and had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and began to teach them many things. And so Jesus was compassionate on these people. He'd had probably one of the worst days of his life. He's wore out. They haven't had any time to eat. He's thinking, I'm finally going to get away from all these crowds. Lands his boat. All these people are there. The disciples are going, oh, Lord, can we just catch a break here a little bit? And Jesus is having compassion on them, and he begins to teach them. Now, where they were was a desolate place. It was a remote place. It was late in the day when Jesus does this miracle of feeding the 5,000 men plus women and children. And so here's three things about momentum you can take away from what we're about to talk about. Number one is this, is circumstances can be misleading. When you need momentum, when you need a God movement in your life, so often we think circumstances have got to be right for God to move, and they don't. They don't. So circumstances can be misleading. Number two is this, is that the timing may seem absolutely terrible, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. And then the third, because of the circumstances and also because of the timing, the request, like what God asks of you may just seem like over the top, ridiculous, too much God, you've gone overboard with this ask in my life. Because again, you go back to the disciples, they're in the boat, they've gone, they've landed, they're in this remote place. Jesus has been teaching all day long. The day has been wearing on. These people have got nothing to eat. The disciples come to them and say, listen, Jesus, we care about these folks. They're good people, but they need to eat. They're hungry. And they've got no place to stay. There's no lodging here where we are. So send them away. Because what it says and what it looks like is the circumstances, they just don't lend themselves to really much else happening right now. We're in a desolate place. You know, we feel like that, don't we? I mean, in our marriages at times, we just feel like we're in a desolate place. We're like, God, how are you going to do anything here? Or we feel like that way in our work. Or sometimes in churches, we feel like this is a desolate place. We're like, God, what are you going to do here? But you cannot allow circumstances to dictate the movement of God or the momentum of God, because so many times circumstances are misleading to us. They look one way to us, and they are that way. I mean, it's the reality of it. But listen, but God is so much bigger than that. And so don't allow circumstances to dictate your faith, because your faith is so much bigger than that, because God is greater than any circumstance that you might face in your life. The second thing was timing. We think the timing is terrible. You know, it's late in the day. The day has wore on. Jesus, to send these people away, there's no food here. There's no food there. The only way they're going to eat is they go to another town. They've got takeout over there. Somebody's got some food. Send them away, because the timing is it's wrong. And we think at times that, you know what, God, the timing of the ask, the timing of the conviction of sin, the timing of the relationship get together or maybe even break up, it's like, God, the timing is all wrong. But we forget that God's not bound by time. He's not bound by circumstance. He's not bound by an early morning or a late day or even you when you're wore out. He's not bound by those things. So when we're looking for God to provide momentum in our lives or momentum in ministry in our church, listen, all those things just kind of go out the window. It doesn't matter. And then when you add up the time and you also add up the circumstances, we get to this place where, you know, it's like, God, this ask that you request of us just seems to be, it's just too much. Because remember what the disciples have been through. Just kind of put yourself in their position for a minute. It's all day long. They've been ministering with Jesus, and all these people, they get in a boat. They leave because they're trying to get away, to have a little time to themselves, to have a moment to eat something. And then at the end of that day, Jesus turns around to them and says, listen, you feed them. You take care of these people. You be the one that provides for all of them. And the disciples are like, 8 months' wages, 200 denarii wouldn't be enough to feed all of the people who are here. You've just asked too much, God. You ever felt like that? You ever felt like God just said, man, this is what I want from you? You're like, man, God, this is just too much. Do you know how tired I am? Do you know how rough it is at work? Do you know how difficult it is at home? Do you know what's going on with my children? Do you know how badly I feel? And the circumstances aren't right, God. The timing is terrible, Lord. And what you're asking for me financially, or what you're asking for me just emotionally, or what you're asking for me just physically, God, I can't do it. And the truth is, they couldn't do it either. They're like, hey, we got some kid here. He's got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. We can't feed him, Jesus. I mean, we're ready to go to all the towns and buy the food if that's what you want us to do. But I don't know if you've looked around, but it ain't happening. And God may lay things on your heart, and you look around and you think, and you're not lying to God, and you're not even testing God. You're just like, God, this ain't happening. I mean, look at the circumstance, look at the timing to ask. You're asking me for something that I don't have. And here, at this point, and I want to be careful with this, but at this point, you got to remember that sometimes common sense goes out the door. I mean, really, it does. No, God gives us common sense. It protects you, and it helps you, and it keeps your feet on the ground. So I'm not saying don't pay attention to common sense. What I am saying is this, is that common sense and faith are often on 2 separate pages of the book. I mean, they got their own chapters. They got their own kind of certain situations and circumstances. So there are days where, yeah, common sense, it works good. But there's going to be moments in your life where God enters in, and the circumstances are misleading, and the timing's bad, and the ask is big, and you really don't even have what it is that he's asking for. And you're like, God, this doesn't make any sense. And he's like, I know. But see, that's where he asks us to step in and to trust him and to follow him and to love him and to pursue him. And I can't tell you, you know, when that is and when that isn't. That's got to be out of your own walk with God. You know it. When God's asking for what you don't have and you're saying no because you don't trust. But you've got to understand the difference between common sense and faith. Sometimes they are on opposite pages of the book, and you've got to go with faith over and against common sense. Here's the passage in Luke 9. Late in the afternoon, the 12 disciples came to him and said, send the crowds away to the nearby villages and farms so that they can find food and lodging for the night. There's nothing to eat in this place. And there wasn't. And Jesus said to them, you do it. You feed them. You take care of it. But they said, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And they answered, or are you expecting us to go and buy enough food for this whole crowd? For there were about 5,000 men there. And Jesus replied, tell them to sit down in groups of about 50 each. And so it didn't make any sense. And so when God moves and there's momentum created in a ministry or there's momentum created in your life, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. But that's when you trust and you walk by faith and not by sight. So here's finally the miracle at the very end of Luke chapter 9. So all the people sat down. Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and he looked up toward heaven and he blessed them. And then breaking the loaves into pieces, he kept giving the bread and the fish to the disciples so that they could distribute it to the people. And they all ate as much as they wanted, and afterwards the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of leftovers. So sometimes God asks what you do not have and what you cannot understand. And that's his prerogative. He can do that. God has asked me at times for things that I did not understand and for things that I did not have. And I got a little frustrated. I was like, what do you want me to do? God, I don't have it. How do you want me to give what I don't have? But here's the clue to momentum is that you give God what you do have. We have something. You've got a day. You've got a weekend. You've got an hour. You've got another few steps in your... we've got a lot more than we would like to own up to the Lord. But when you give God what you have, then that's what creates the momentum in your life. The little boy... There's 5 loaves and his 2 fish. He gave what he had, and God fed 15,000 people with 12 basketfuls of leftovers. He intentionally told them, go pick up the leftovers, put them in the baskets, because I want to make sure everybody understands what just happened. And so what is it that you have that God wants? What is it that you have that you need to give back to him? Now, just scratch money out of your head for a minute because we talk about that a lot. Weekends, Friday nights, date nights, nights out with the guys, nights out with the girls, your mornings, your school, your career. So many different things that we have that we need to offer over to God and say, God, this is yours. It's yours, God. I give you whatever it is that I have so that you can do what you want to do through me and through my life. If you want to see God move, if that's a desire in your life, if you want to see the Lord do some things in your life, then that's what you've got to do. Because if you withhold those things for yourself, then you cut off the power and presence and the momentum of God in your life. If you want to see those things happen, then you've got to willingly just say, God, here it is, open hand, Father. I lay down my life as a living sacrifice before you. Let it be my spiritual offering to you. Let me pray for us.